Hello guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on CRYSIS Remastered using the RTX 3060 Ti. I'm going to be starting it off with 1080p at the very high preset. Let's go and jump into the settings real quick. 1080p, and we're using very high settings, starting it off with that ray tracing and DLSS as well. I'll be enabling that later on as well. There's enemies here. I was going to originally do a video on Flight Sim with the 3060 Ti, but after downloading it, Windows was having a bunch of issues and I just wouldn't want to boot it up, and the Microsoft Store actually just straight up broke, which was causing it to not open up, I'm guessing. So after all that time downloading it, it just failed. So we're going to be just playing CRYSIS today, and I'll be going back to Flight Sim later on. I've got to go ahead and re-download the whole thing again, which will be a pain. But playing at 1080p, very high settings though, we are averaging around 90 FPS with dips into the 80s, which is not that bad. This game is quite intensive. I'll be trying out the max preset as well in a second. But let's go and actually enable ray tracing first and see how it does with that. So enabling ray tracing at very high settings. Should be able to hold 60 with this card. Shouldn't be an issue, I'm hoping. We don't really need DLSS at this point. 1080p, we are way above 60, averaging around 70 to 80 FPS with ray tracing at very high settings. So we're gonna skip that, but at 440p and 4K we'll definitely need it, so we'll be trying it out over there. Alright, playing at the max preset now, which is called Can It Run CRYSIS, playing without ray tracing and no DLSS as well. Gotta disable motion blur. Alright, we can hold 60 so far, 70 FPS, which means it doesn't leave us with much headroom when we enable ray tracing, but we are able to hold 60 to 70 quite easily, which means when we enable ray tracing we're going to actually fall below 60 for sure. Oh, I thought he couldn't see me. So yeah, the max FPS that I've actually seen it hit is like around 85 FPS, and the lowest I've seen it is around 59 FPS, so ran quite well the whole time. No stuttering. Headshot. But yeah, no stuttering, no lag spikes. Are those friendlies? Yeah, they're not. I don't know why they're Corsair kind of misleading. Game just felt laggy for a second there. I will admit the game did feel kind of stuttery there. Let's go ahead and enable ray tracing real quick as well. See how it does. We're gonna be playing at the max ray tracing preset. Wow, that's a decent dip there. Sitting in the 50s now. There's a lot of recoil on it. Oh, chill, can I just please? I just want to grab your gun. Thank you. Honestly, not too bad. We're still in the 50s. I was for sure expecting us to be in the 40s, but we are in the mid 50s, so we're on a 10 FPS decrease while enabling ray tracing. It does feel quite smooth still, I will say. It just started a little bit there, but the aiming feels quite fine. Maybe a little bit laggy when we fall into the mid 40s, but for the most part it is feeling quite good. We are getting 70 FPS now with Quality DLSS. Quality feels pretty good, maybe a little bit blurry, slightly. Not too bad though. Wow, we're still in the 50s. By looking this way, we still do fall into the 50s. I didn't even realize until now. Let's go and actually increase DLSS to balanced and see how it does with balanced. And even with balanced, we're not getting much of a increase in FPS. We're still in the mid to low 50s. Alright, playing the game at 1440p, very high settings. Man, this game is intensive. I've never seen the 3060 Ti fail this much at 1440p before. We're in the 50s already. We are playing at very high settings, so you could drop it down to high, and that'll push you up to 60, or even medium, I guess. But this is by far the worst I've seen it perform in any game, I think. Normally holds 60 quite well at 1440p, but yeah, in the 40s. Gonna harvest some ammo for you guys real quick. This is much better. Once we actually leave the jungle area, I guess, heaps of foliage there. Once we leave that, we do jump up to the 70s, the 60s to 70s. But as you go through this area with heaps of foliage, you will fall down into the 50s, just like that. Then when you pan the camera back, low 50s. And then we're gonna go ahead and enable DLSS, start off with quality like always. Now we're getting 65 to 68 FPS in this specific area when we were sitting at 51 to 53 FPS. So quite a decent improvement compared to what we had at 1080p. Alright, are we getting some flickering when I pan the camera actually? Wow, VRAM is almost maxed out as well, 7.3 gigs. That's not good. We're almost fully maxed out. We only have 8 gigabytes available to us and it's almost full. Now actually enabling ray tracing, we are in the 40s to low 50s. So we lost around 6 to 7 FPS with ray tracing as well. Now I think I'm going to run into the same issue as the 3050 as well with this card. We're going to be probably VRAM limited at 4K and FPS will be in the 30s to 20s. If I was going to guess. Alright, now playing the game at max settings, let's go ahead and compare. Game does feel far more stuttery. VRAM got increased by around 300 megabytes as well. We were sitting at 7.3 gigs, now we're sitting at 7.6 gigs. We're getting some popping in the distance as well. We are getting 60 FPS in this area, so obviously your performance will depend in the area that you're in. Some areas are far more intensive than others in this game. And in this area, we're able to get 70 FPS. We just had a dip into the 50s, but we are able to get 60 to 70 FPS. So if I was going to walk back, okay, there's enemies here again. Oh, his gun just flew off. Okay, if I actually run back over here, I should drop down into the 40s. Yep, there we go, dropping down to the 40s, low 50s. Far more intensive than the other area. So again, your FPS will heavily depend on what you're looking at and what area you're in. Now I don't think DLSS is going to help us here. FPS is far too low for us to be able to play at 60 with this without the game looking really bad. But I'll try it anyway. We'll use performance DLSS and see if we can get 60. And we still can't get 60 FPS. Very close to it. Oh, there we go. We just hit 60. But the game does look far too blurry at this point. Especially in the distance, the grass looks super blurry. The gun itself looks fine, I would say. But the grass looks really bad. Let's go and try add ray tracing at max preset. Oh boy, this feels so laggy at this point. 30 FPS at 1440p. Aiming feels awful. So much input delay. We're gonna go invisible so they don't see us. So yeah, for sure we're gonna have issues at 4K. Even without ray tracing, it's gonna be a bit of a pain to run, I would say. Let's gonna use ultra performance DLSS with maxed out ray tracing. This is not gonna help us too much, I don't think. Not bad, 50 FPS, but yeah, the game doesn't look too good. Especially when you're moving around. You can definitely see the flaws in the environment with DLSS at this extreme preset anyway. If you play at quality, it's not that bad, but at ultra performance mode, for sure, you're gonna be able to tell the difference. Okay, so we're getting 20 FPS at 4K very high settings. Same issue as the RTX 3050. Around the same performance as well, actually, I think. We're getting around this level of FPS at 4K. Maybe even worse, actually, I don't know. It's definitely gonna be a VRAM issue at this point, because the 3060 Ti is far more powerful than a 3050, but the FPS is identical, or even lower actually. This area is obviously a little bit different than the 3050, but we're getting 10 FPS. Oh my god. Okay, well that's kind of unplayable. I'm gonna be using ultra performance. That's what it gave us by default. Let's see how it does. It should look decent still. Yeah, it doesn't look as good as 4K, that's for sure. It looks super blurry in the distance, even at 4K. I can barely see the enemies. And we're only getting 30. We're only getting 30 FPS. Okay, there we go. Yeah, that's still quite unplayable. Wow, this game is so intensive. This is definitely okay. I can't even win any fights. All right, we're playing the game at max settings. We have everything cranked up to its max preset. Even have ray tracing enabled as well, and no DLSS. This is it's gonna be a single digit FPS again. There we go, max settings, no DLSS and no motion blur, please. 9 FPS, just like the RTX 3050, I believe. Game looks so nice though. If you stand still and take a screenshot of this, it looks super sharp. But the actual experience playing this is just not very good at all. This card isn't really a 4K card, especially for max settings, but it's still fun to try it out and see how it does. Definitely wouldn't recommend playing like this. You can play at 4K medium settings or low settings, and you can definitely run the game at 60, especially with DLSS. Alright, as you can see, we're playing the game at 4K with medium settings, no ray tracing as well, and DLSS set to quality, and we're able to get over 60 FPS quite fine. So this card is still a great card at 4K, for 4K gaming. You just can't expect it to run everything at max settings at 4K. Alright, that's it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, if you found it useful. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. And as always, see you next time.